The US openly seized Russian tankers on the high seas. What happened? Why are American commandos boarding ships in the North Atlantic? Did Maduro really betray, I'd even say abandon Putin? And what might Russia do now, having lost its vessel? Or even two, Oreshnik and the nuclear threat, just another scare tactic. Or is it already reality? We're going to break it all down in this episode, friends. But first, subscribe to this YouTube channel and don't forget, give us a like and leave your comments as well. Let's get started so we don't waste your time. So actually, it all started back in the summer of 2025. The main character, so to speak, of our story is an oil tanker called Bella 1. Its route, Iran, the Mediterranean Sea, the Atlantic. It was sailing empty, so to speak, but even then it was already under US sanctions for transporting Iranian oil. Its destination is Venezuela, another country under strict sanctions. But in order to stay under the radar, the vessel regularly turns off its transponder. That's a kind of beacon that shows its position. It turns into a ghost ship, so to speak. That's actually where the term shadow tanker fleet of Russia comes from, but not for the US Coast Guard. You can't hide from them, as the story would later show. In December 25th of the same year, in the Caribbean Sea, they make their first attempt to board the Bella 1. A court order. They have it. But something goes wrong. The attempt fails, and then a real ocean chase begins, so to speak. The US Coast Guard ship chases the Bella 1 for more than 2 weeks. Just imagine a huge tanker and a military ship, just two tiny dots in the ocean. And this was, in fact, part of Trump's pressure on Venezuela. Then on December 30th of that same year, 2025, the crew of the Bella 1 makes an unexpected move. They raise the Russian flag and rename the vessel to Marinera. Legally, it is now Russian and, according to the declared route, is heading to Murmansk. This was an attempt to hide under the protection of the Russian state. Russia immediately responds, sending a diplomatic note to the US demanding they back off, so to speak, and dispatched military escort ships, including a submarine. The situation suddenly turned from a hunt for a sanctions violator into an international naval military confrontation, as you can imagine. But the United States of America does not back down. On the contrary, they launched large-scale military activity. Transport planes, helicopters, and special forces are arriving in the United Kingdom. There's an entire armada in the air. P-8 Poseidon reconnaissance aircraft, AC-130, J Ghost Rider fire support aircraft. These are flying artillery, British Typhoon fighters. Friends, this was no longer just surveillance, as you understand. This was preparation for a major operation. And so on January 7th, it happened. In the harsh conditions of the North Atlantic, near Russian warships, submarines, and so on, American forces carried out a boarding operation. A very important point. The crew did not resist. Well, I understand them, honestly. It's hard to resist the Americans. The seizure was carried out safely and efficiently, as later confirmed. The Americans themselves would later say so. Almost simultaneously with these events, developments were unfolding in another part of the ocean because it became known that another tanker had been detained, already the second Russian tanker called Sofia. Both are part of the so-called shadow fleet, which I have already mentioned, that violates sanctions. The United States of America is making it clear, look, this is a signal to everyone. Who thinks they can circumvent international law? We will find you even in the ocean. Now let's take a look, friends, at how the parties are reacting to this. First of all, Ukraine. Let's say it right away. Ukraine welcomed the actions of the United States. Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha has said that this is decisive leadership. It's an approach of taking action, not being afraid. For Kyiv, this is an important signal that the policy of toughness towards Russia continues. The United States stated that they acted on the basis of a court decision and the crew may be brought to the US for trial. In other words, they will simply be sent to court. The crew? Then the speculation began. There were Ukrainians, supposedly more Ukrainians than Russians. Then it turned out there were more Russians than Ukrainians, well, among the crew. Then it was revealed that allegedly if there were any Ukrainians, they had Russian passports. And these aren't Ukrainians, but those who were in Crimea. Well, in short, they're just starting to manipulate this whole story. The main thing is that this tanker, well, one of these two tankers was detained, friends. And what happens next? And what happens next is that now Russia says this is a serious threat to Russian sailors. The Trump administration is presenting this as a major success in the fight for security. And here's Moscow. In Moscow, it's just hysteria, friends. Tears, snot, and everything as it should be, as they say. In the State Duma of the Russian Federation, they started talking about a military invasion of Russia's borders, even though the vessel was in international waters. Just for the record, there's this one deputy, a drunkard, Zhuravlyov. He's calling to respond with torpedoes to sink American boats to engage in battle, he says. The Z Patriots start threatening the US with nukes, start threatening with Oreshnik. The Russian Foreign Ministry started talking about the humane treatment of their citizens on board, and so on and so forth. But the most interesting thing is Putin's own silence. Did you notice? He's silent, he doesn't comment on anything. But why? That's a good question. Maybe the Kremlin itself still hasn't decided how to respond. Earlier, they thought Trump was working for them, so to speak, putting pressure on Ukraine. Now there's a strike against Venezuela, their ally, and a direct action against Russian tankers. Did Maduro go too far and set up Putin? So friends, is this a reversal of US policy or just tough pressure for a future deal? That's the question. There's really no clear answer. So what do we end up with as a result? First, sanctions. Finally, the way they should be. These are real force operations far from the shores of the US. You could say the shadow fleet of the Russian Federation has come to an end because no one is going to play games with them anymore. Now, these 2 episodes in the ocean have shown that if sanctions don't work, if the enforcement mechanism for these sanctions doesn't work, if you still find loopholes to bypass these sanctions, we will act like this. Ukraine, with the help of Malyuk and Sea Baby, destroys tankers, and we will simply detain them, just like they did and showed the whole world. Okay? By the way, Ukraine is a trendsetter in this context because we were the first to start implementing real, effective, genuine sanctions. Malyuk was the one who started doing this. Second, Russia has found itself in a difficult situation. To respond seriously would mean risking a direct war. The United States, and it seems Putin is not ready for that. To limit himself to words would make him look weak. Their propagandists are already calling to strike with nuclear weapons, even against Ukraine or the United States of America. But in reality, these are just the words of confused people. They don't know what to do. And of course, they'd like to hit Ukraine with everything they've got, so to speak, to let it all out now. But in reality, friends, we have to say that this is helplessness. So much time has passed, and yet Putin remains silent. How does that happen? Thirdly, for Ukraine, this is certainly a positive signal. It shows that pressure on Russia from the West can not only be maintained, but also intensified with new, unexpected methods. This undermines the Kremlin's economic schemes. The main question, friends, is what happens next? Will this become the norm? Will the United States of America continue to seize other ships, other tankers? How will Russia try, so to speak, to strike back? The most likely scenario is an increase in cyber attacks and sabotage, but not an open military confrontation with the United States of America. In my personal opinion, this is absolutely out of the question right now, no matter what anyone writes or says. However, the rhetoric and threats against Ukraine could really intensify here and be put into practice. Simply put, Russia could just start hitting Ukraine even harder. This story, friends, with the Marinera and Sofia tankers is a vivid example of how a cold economic war occasionally shifts into a hot operational phase. This is a story about how international law, when backed by force, actually works. Let's put it that way. And this is a story about how authoritarian regimes, even those with nuclear weapons, can find themselves in a dead end when their illegal schemes are exposed and stopped. Remember this event, friends. It could become a turning point. Write in the comments what you think about this, and in your opinion, will Russia do anything next? How will it respond? How will it react? And are the United States of America ready for further, so to speak, escalation? This is really very interesting. I look forward to your comments under this video in the chat. Thank you for watching it until the end. Take care of yourselves and all the best.